Hi, I'm Bill, amateur radio operator November 4, Bravo Kilo Tango, and I'm here today going to show you a little bit about some NightFire kits that were provided to us. Oops, here's one of them right here. This is a NightFire kit, and we're going to be putting some together at the Hamfest coming up. So I've got a small kit here for the kids to put together, and we're going to go through that in just a second here. Okay, so what I have in my hand here is the small kit. This is a torch kit, or a flashlight kit. It's got a couple of LEDs, a few switches, some resistors, and a 9-volt battery. Very easy and simple to put together, and we're going to go through what's in this kit in just a second here. Okay, so we've got the kit here sitting on the bench. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I'll take a look at what's inside of it. So here we've got a circuit board, which is a nice double-sided circuit board, and it's got plated through holes, very professional quality product. And we've got an instruction sheet, and this instruction sheet has, well, it's got a circuit board right here. It's got the schematic diagram. It has a list of some of the ways you can put things together and which way to put things around as far as orienting the parts on the board and how to put the wiring through the board. And it has a bill of materials. This bill of materials over here lists everything that should be included inside this kit. And what's included inside this kit should be inside the bag here. It's all in a closed, sealed bag. And what we've got inside this bag here is a slide switch. We've got a couple of momentary push button switches and two clear lens LEDs, a red lens LED, that's a light emitting diode, and we've got a regular rectifier diode here, as well as a couple of resistors and a battery clip, and that's all the parts that are in there. So I'm going to open this bag up and we'll see what we got inside here. Actually, we see it already. Let's open the bag up and get ready to start assembling. So open it up, get the parts out, and make sure that we've got everything that we need. We look at the schematic here. It's got two resistors, which we have. We have three diodes, light emitting diodes. These light emitting diodes have little arrows on the schematic symbols. And a standard diode is this right here, and that's the standard diode. This diode has a band on it. What a diode does is it only allows electricity to flow in one direction. So it flows in one direction only. That means if you, the way they have it set here, if you accidentally put the battery on backwards, of course no current is going to flow through the diode when the battery, actually the voltage does flow through the diode. If you hook it up backwards, nothing flows through the diode. So it's a reverse polarity protection. If you've got it backwards, nothing happens, and if you have it the right way, you'll have a bit of forward voltage loss on the diode, but the LEDs are going to function the way they should. And it's important to note that if you hook a light emitting diode up backwards, you may be able to damage it if you don't have any current limiting there. So let's go ahead and we'll get started stuffing the board. We take a look here at the board. The board has a silk screen on it, and the silk screen shows where the different components go. So for here we can see R1 on this side, R2 on this side, L1 on this side, L2 on this side, L3 in the center, and the on-off switch, which is this little guy right here. This on-off switch goes right there, and you can see it just goes right down into the board there. So we're going to turn our iron on in just a moment and wait for the iron to get fired up, and we'll go from there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started assembling here. First of all, we can see we've got all our parts together on the sheet, and we've got our little list here up at the top that has the bill of materials. The first two items on the list are symbols on the circuit board in the schematic as R1, which is 330 ohms, and R2, which is 330 ohms. And they're the only resistors in the pack, but these guys are 330 ohms. They actually have an orange, and a brown band on them with gold on the end. So we don't need to go into too much details on that, but that is a 330 ohm 20% tolerance resistor. So in order for us to put this down into the board, we can see right here there's a label that says R1, and on this side here one that says R2 on the board, and we can see that these resistors, in order for it to go down in that hole, it's going to go across, and we're going to get it on the printed wiring board. We're going to bend the leads like so. We're going to bend it down like that, and then we should be able to put it right into the board just like that. It drops right down into the holes. So once we put this in the hole there, that's the first resistor, R1, we can bend the leads down further this way, and that way they won't fall out when we turn it over, because we're going to solder it next. So before we get soldering, I'm going to cover a couple of safety details, and we'll go from there. So be right back. Okay, so before we get soldering, we want to talk a little bit about safety. Part of what you want to do for your safety in soldering is you want to make sure you wear a set of eye covers, so that if you're soldering, this solder here is not a solid piece of metal. It actually has a rosin core inside of it, and this particular solder is a little spool of Radio Shack solder. It's 60/40. It's lead and tin with a rosin core, and the rosin that's inside there is a liquid flux, and what that does, that makes the solder flow around the connections that we have inside here. If you've got some newer solder, if you go to Radio Shack now, you can still get the tin lead solder, but if you go to some place like Walmart, what you're going to end up getting is likely going to be lead-free solder. It's going to take even more heat. So for soldering itself, let me move the camera over here, and you can see there's a soldering station here, and the soldering station, the one that is actually on right now with the lights blinking on and off, it's this guy right here, and this little iron here is a light duty one. Of course, when we're out at the Hamfest, we're going to use just a portable iron, but it does the same thing. And when we're soldering, we want to make sure that we're not wearing shorts. You don't want to have a glob of solder. As you can see on my bench here, I got lots of little globs of solder that have come off as I'm working on this. You don't want to have any kind of globs of solder that might possibly get into, well, get on your legs. It's going to burn you. So make sure you're wearing something to cover your legs. Make sure you're wearing eye protection before you get started soldering, because you definitely don't want to get any kind of globs of solder in where your eyes are. So let's get back and take a look at what's on the board here, and we'll get started soldering in just a minute. Okay, so we already loaded up our first resistor onto the board. That was R1, and we bent it over so that it was held in place. Now that we've bent it over, what we're going to do is we're going to use a set of diagonal cutters, and I am going to cut off some of the extra wire here so that it's not in our way when we go to solder. And of course you could do this after it's soldered as well, but I've cut off the extra wire there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this into a holder in just a moment here. As soon as I dig it up, give me just a moment and get my little circuit board holder so I can solder on this. Okay, so I've got it loaded up in the extra hand here. I don't know if you can see that, but this is a little device that you can also, I believe this one is one that I got from Radio Shack years ago, but it's just got some adjusters on here and an alligator clip on either side, so you can hold something and get it soldered together if you're working on a small item. So let's zoom in here, and we'll get started soldering in just a moment. So right here is what I'm going to solder. The resistor is on the other side, And so I'm going to pick up the iron, and you hear a little bit of hissing going on there. That's me wetting the tip, and we're going to put some solder on it. Okay, so we're going to put some solder on it, and I'm going to touch the tip to the board and put a little more solder in there, and it goes right in. So I'm going to clean the tip off again, and I'm going to heat up the connection and then put some solder in there, and that's it. So it's soldered, and if we take a look, it's soldered there, and it's in place. So we've got the first part in place. Now we can just load up the second part. We'll do the same thing with R2. We'll fold it over, just like that. We're going to put it in place, right through the holes. So R2 is right there. And we'll do the same thing we did before. We'll fold it over that way and fold it over that way so that it's in place. Cut off the excess amount of lead with the side cutters. And that's another reason for wearing the safety goggles, is to make sure that if you clip a lead off, that it doesn't go flying and potentially get to your eye. So we've got it in place. Do the same thing. We'll touch it to the surface, let it get nice and hot. Put some solder on there. I'll let go. Now it's soldered. Do the same thing over here. Get it hot. So when we're soldering, we're actually applying the solder to the surface that we're soldering, as opposed to the tip itself. I wet the tip at first so that the tip has a nice coating of solder on it, and that will help transfer the heat. There needs to be a little bit of solder on the tip itself. Okay, so we got that going. We've got resistor 1 and resistor 2, and now we're going to go on to the next step. The next step is going to be putting in some of these bigger items. We've got 2 switches here, and this is switch 1, and it's a push button switch, so it's just momentary. And what that does is that allows us to press it and hold it. It will be on as long as you're holding it. And this one, there's 2 switches here, they're the same. It just goes right down into the board, just like that. In fact, on this switch, the pins are bent a little bit, so straighten them out. Make sure it gets down onto the board. There it goes. So there it is. It's in there. That's switch 1, and this is the second switch. Actually, that's switch 2, and this is switch 1. So I got both the switches in there, and we can feel they're going in place right. Now, one thing we can do to make sure these don't fall out is we can take our diagonal pliers here and just bend these leads in a little bit so that they're held in to the board, just like that, so that they don't fall off. So they're mechanically straight before we go ahead and solder them down electrically. So I'm going to put this back in the clip there, and we'll go ahead and solder those up. So what we're going to do is just make sure that's still in the camera there. Okay, and hopefully this is going to come out good. We'll go ahead and apply the heat to the board, and solder it, and go to the other side, and solder that one. We'll go over here, solder this one, over here, and solder this one. So that's S1 is installed. Okay, we'll get a little closer there for the second one. So what we're going to do is heat the surface. And then flow the solder in to the joint. Get it on the other side. There we go. So that should have it all soldered in, and that's for the two switches there, S1 and S2, and they're in, they're not off the board, they're set on the board properly. And so let's go to the next part. And so for the next part we're going to put in the first diode. This is D1, and this diode here, I don't know, it's not focusing on it. Well, anyway, let's pull it back out, and we'll go ahead and zoom out here. Okay, this is the diode here, and it has a band on one side. I don't know if you can see that there, but it does have a band on one side. So the side with the band is called the cathode, and the side without the band is called the anode. And we're going to bend this over. And since this is polarity sensitive, unlike the resistors and switches, which you can put in whichever way you want, we have to pay attention to which end is the band. So on the board there is a band on the overlay for the silk screen that actually shows D1, that labels the part on the board, and it shows a band at the cathode end, and that matches the band actually on the diode itself. So we want to make sure that we get that the right way around when we put it in. So we can see the diode is set with, I guess if we could actually get it in here. Okay. So we've got it here with the diode, cathode, cathode. So the band is facing away from the edge of the board, and it's going towards the center of the board. So I'm going to go ahead and pop that down, push it right down through the board, and flip it over, and do the same thing that we did before. Bend those leads over, and I'm going to cut the excess off. Okay, so I'm going to cut the excess off here. Get that extra bit of lead out of the way. Same thing there. So now we've got the diode physically installed. We're going to go ahead and solder that rascal down. We'll flip the board back over again, and we're going to do the same thing we did before. I'll zoom it in here a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and solder that diode. We're going to wet the tip. We'll get the solder out. And we're going to apply heat first to the board. And allow it to flow right in through the hole there. Same thing here. You get the board, let it flow through. And there we go. We've got the diode installed. So be careful when you're done, because the part's going to be hot. Obviously, we just had it up to about 700 degrees there, actually closer to 800 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and look at the next part. The next part we're going to put in is going to be this switch here, and this switch is a slide switch, and it goes down on the board in such a way that it's on the side. We can flip it on and off, and it just goes down into the board until it's seated. And this one has a lot of pins to it. We can still bend it over to give it a good mechanical hit. I'm pushing over the tabs at the edge. You don't necessarily have to do that, but that gives it a little bit more of a mechanical edge when it comes to moving it over the course of time. So now, go ahead and solder this rascal in. I'm going to get the pad nice and hot, solder it in, These are not electrically connected here on the outside. These are the tabs for the case of the switch. And now we're going to solder this switch in. And this switch has more than 2 parts to it. So we want to make sure that we don't get any bridges on the solder. We only want to solder one pin to one pin. If we got too much solder on there, we could get a solder bridge. Solder bridge is not a good thing because that's actually going to short out the part, not allow it to do its job. So we get the next one here. Next one. The soldering goes pretty quick once you get the hang of it. Next one. And the next one. So there we got all the parts soldered together. And when we're done, we want to inspect it, make sure we don't have any kind of bridging going on there. That all the part, get it up here, that the part itself, there we go, that we don't have anything, any globs of solder that are crossing over those pads and shorting things out. So now we got the switch installed, and we're going to, from here, we're going to get down to the last 3 parts. And the last 3 parts we have are these three LEDs here. And there's 2 of them that are clear and 1 that's red. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put the red one down on the board. We're going to put the red one down on the board here in the center, and the 2 clear ones on the outer edges. So what we take a look at here is on the diode itself, one lead on the diode is slightly longer than the other, and that denotes the cathode and anode. And I'm going to show you on the schematic here and on the instructions. It shows us how to tell which end is which. So just a second, I'm going to see if I can magnify this and read it so that I can read it out to you, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so we're down to the last few components to be put onto this board. There are 4 components left. 3 of them are LEDs, and then the last one is going to be the battery clip for the 9-volt battery. So what we're going to do, let's go ahead and get our LEDs lined up right. If you take a look at these LEDs, you'll see that one lead is longer, and the longer leg is always the anode. The anode is the positive, the one that goes to the positive lead, and the cathode is the one that goes to the negative lead for an LED to be able to light up. So when we take a look here, this longer leg, when we go to put this down into the circuit board, one of these pads looks different than the other. One has a round pad, or the pattern on the circuit board, and one has a square pad. The square pad indicates the anode, or the positive one. So we're going to put the longer leg into the square pad first, and when we put this down, we'll see, oh wait a minute, we don't want the LED to be going this way, we want the LED to be at a right angle. So before we put this in, what we're going to do is take our LED, we're going to hold it in our pliers, and I'm holding it at the body there, so that when I bend the lead, I'm going to bend this lead down to a right angle, and you can still see which one is the longer one, but I made sure to bend it this way so that when we put it on the board, it's going to be facing the right direction around. And so we have a longer lead here, and we're going to put it right down into the board, and we're going to leave it just enough space that it can sit right on top of the board. and that way it's got a little bit of a lip on it there. So we'll go ahead and do that with the other one. I'll do the same thing. But first, before I put it down in there, I want to make sure I've got it the right way around. So I'm looking at the longer lead, and I'm putting it down into the hole with the longer lead, and that way I know which way around I want to bend this light emitting diode. And so what I've got is got my pliers there, got it right up against the body, and now I can bend it, and I've got the longer lead going into the hole with the pad that is square. And so we'll just put it right down in there, and that's for the two clear LEDs. And we're going to do the same thing for the last LED. This last LED is a red one, but you can see it also has one lead that's slightly longer, and we're going to orient this on the board so that I'm going to let this one stick out just a little bit more, so I'm not going to be right up at the edge of the body there, and I'm going to give that an extra millimeter there that we didn't have on the others, and that way when I put that down, it's going to be not sitting on the edge of the board, it'll be hanging over the edge of the board. And once again, the longer lead is going into the hole that has the square pad. And there we go. So now you can see we've got the LEDs, they're all at a right angle, and they're not all exactly the same. Kind of looks like two eyes and a nose there. And so now what I can do, I'm going to hold these down in place, and I'm going to bend the leads back so that the components won't fall out. This won't be a permanent position. When we've done soldering, we can go ahead and move these around a little bit, but now they're not going to fall out of the board while we're soldering. And so we can put this into the little helper hands there. We'll go ahead and give it a solder up. So let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. Maybe we can get a better close look at it while I'm soldering. So I'm going to put the tip on the sponge a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and get the pad warm first. I'm going to flow the solder in there, and that's all it takes, just a little bit. Get the pad warm, flow the solder in there. Got that LED soldered in. Go to the next one. Get that soldered in. Go to the next one. And the final one. Get that soldered in. Okay, so now we've got all those soldered in. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and cut off these leads. And before we go to cut off these leads, as always, you should be wearing eye protection. So make sure that before you start cutting, make sure that you're wearing your eye protection, so that if a lead flies off in some odd direction, that you're not going to get hit with it. Now this particular one, what I like to do is I like to hold the lead if I can. I'll hold the lead before I snap it off, and that way it doesn't have a chance to go flying. Same thing here. And with these diagonal cutters, all you do is just put it down there and clip off the excess lead. And there we go. Got a little bit of extra on that other lead over there. Okay, so now we've got all our parts soldered on, and what we can do at this point is we can take a look and make sure that the components are positioned the way we want. I can adjust the diode over just a little bit so that it points the way I like it, so that it's not all messed up there in the way it points. And we've got all our parts in there. We want to take a look and make sure we don't have any solder bridges. We don't have anything where solder is actually touching across parts that it's not supposed to. And so the last thing we've got to put on here is our battery lead. Now for the battery lead, we could just solder the battery leads right into the board with the negative, the black lead going into B minus, and the red, the positive lead going into B plus. But if we do that, we're going to be wiggling that wire a lot. That's going to be a lot of strain on that wire, and eventually the wire is going to break. Of course, if we use it enough, the wire is going to break anyway. But what we can do instead of doing that is we could put the red wire through the B plus hole and the black wire through the B minus hole. And then what we can do is we can sort of tie a knot in the wire, and that knot will act as a strain relief. You see, it's keeping it from pulling through the board, and it acts as a strain relief, so that should help the wire connection last longer than if we just put it straight down to the board. So we do that and that. Now we got those two there. So I've got a little knot in it, and what we can do now is we can just bend it over, put it right down in the hole, and then we can solder that. And we'll double check that it's B plus, because it's a whole lot easier to fix something before you solder it than it is after you solder it. After you solder it, you'll have to use solder wick, or you'll have to use a suction device like this guy right here, which you heat up the connection and then put this down there, and when you hit the button, it sucks the solder back up. So we're not doing that right now. We're going to go ahead and solder in our positive, the battery clip. There we go, we've got it in, and it's in place. And now we're going to do the same thing with the negative one. Put that in place. Put it in our little helping hands. Solder that one in. Okay, so now take my glasses off so I can take a look through here, and I can see that that's in good shape, and it's in there physically just fine, and the knots are holding that wire in place. So now what we're ready to do is we're ready to go ahead and hook up our battery, and this is just a regular 9-volt battery. We're going to make sure we put it the right way around and snap it down, and if everything is right, we should be able to see it light up, and there you go, it does. This button lights up the two clear LEDs. This other button lights up the red one, and this switch here turns them on all the time, so it's like a torch this way, or a flasher this way or this way. And of course you could use that to send Morse code if you wanted to do it by visual, or you can of course just use it as a regular torch, just have some fun with it. But that's a very quick project, LED torch or LED flashlight, and that's how to put it together. Hopefully you'll have some fun with it. Okay, so hopefully you had fun watching us put together this little kit. This little kit is from NightFire Electronics, and they've got a website at vakits.com. This one sells for only about $3. It's a little torch kit that you can either turn it on, or you can momentarily turn on any one of, actually two or one of the 3 LEDs on the board. Got about 11 components in it, and it's a real nice little kit. I'll hang on a second here. We've got some other kits that NightFire has. You can find their website at vakits.com. They've got dozens of kits amplifiers, surface mount, and all kinds of stuff, including some PIC controller stuff. So check them out at vakits.com, and don't forget to check out the club website. That's the Martin County Amateur Radio Association. That's at mcaraweb.com. Or you can also find us at our Hamfest website, which is at stuarthamfest.com. That's S-T-U-A-R-T, hamfest.com. So hopefully we'll see you at the Hamfest, where we can put together some of these kits. And if you like the kits, of course you can find them at the VA Kits website. You'll also find those guys at the Stuart Hamfest. So hopefully you'll come see us there.